From the heart of Central Florida, you are listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be with you once again for our program. We're coming to you live in Florida, across the Sunshine State, coast to coast, where we're going to roll up our sleeves and solve problems ourselves. We're not going to rely on tribalism or groupthink to do our thinking for us. That's what you're here for. You got a million programs out there that will tell you to think along party lines, along ideology. On this program, we're all about choice, which allows you to look in the mirror and realize that you yourself have more power over the outcome of your life than just going along with advertising, going along with big special interests and their narratives that they craft each and every week, each and every day in our news cycle. We deconstruct that fake news and we empower you to think critically for yourself. And there's something that we've talked about on this program a lot, and it's something that I studied in college. They call it critical theory, right? So we're talking about critically thinking for ourselves. But what about critical theory? What about what we see all in the news today, which has become the driver's seat of conversation, which is what we call woke, which is a casual term for critical theory, intersectionality, and what we call, this new way of looking at discourse as language being a weapon of power at all times. That discourse itself is war. That there is nothing but power after power. All these different things are issues that we deal with in our media narratives. And it's something that I wanted to have a guest on today who has spent his time focusing on wokeness in critical theory, and that is James Lindsay. How you doing, James?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the program. You're the founder of newdiscourses.com, and you say that you are an anti-revolutionary. What does that mean?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but I am an anti-revolutionary. I think that, generally speaking, the systems that we have in place that could be broadly construed as philosophically liberal tend to work better than revolutionary approaches to shaking things up. I do acknowledge that it took a revolution to start liberalism out of feudalism and monarchism, but that was a while ago. And I actually think that the liberal systems that produce incremental progress through established and effective means of conflict resolution are superior to flipping things over and trying to establish some kind of utopian approach. So in that sense, I am anti-revolutionary, yes.
And yet, it's fashionable on both the left and the right to criticize liberalism. And what we mean by that is, the classical liberal order of a mixed economy, a limited government, right? A republic, capitalism, correct, things like that. Both the right and the left in their intellectual circles, it's very, very agreed upon that if there's one thing they know for sure, it's that liberalism is the rotten core of all of our problems.
That's the going lie. Liberalism is often misunderstood and misconstrued, but liberalism is a system of conflict management. I don't want to position liberalism, especially in the U.S., you have to pause and you have to say, when we say liberal, we don't mean the Democrats, we don't mean left-wing politics. It's actually it's a whole philosophical approach to organizing, and in particular, resolving conflicts. Science is a liberal process. It asks us, when we hit a conflict, you have an opinion, I have an opinion. We say, well, let's go look at the evidence. We find an objective standard as best we can. We do the best experiment we can to approach that objective standard. And then we agree as, civilized human beings that we will defer to what that objective standard says. In liberal law, we establish the law. The law may not be perfect, but we agree that if you and I have a difference, perhaps you're my neighbor and you like to, burn tires in your yard or something, and I don't like it, and I talk to you and you tell me to go, do whatever to myself, and then I say I'm going to take you to court. We have a process by which we can resolve that, and we have to defer to that standard. Within a liberal system, though, the law isn't fixed. It's not the will of kings. It is a process that responds to a democratic polity through, as you mentioned, Republican representatives, not, again, party style, but not Republican Party, but we have a philosophy that we're going to elect representatives to do our democracy for us, and they do it in a democratic fashion. That method is called republicanism. Capitalism is a liberal method. We say, to some degree, let's let the market decide. And we've learned that you can't totally do that. It doesn't work. You have to protect against monopolies. You have to protect against trusts. You have to put some consumer protection laws in because we don't have infinite knowledge. We need something like business regulations to some degree because otherwise people will cut corners and get away with it and do more harm. So we have to, regulate it to some degree, but we've learned that mostly letting the market decide what the market is best at deciding is the best way to answer economic questions. This meta political position is liberalism.
Mm-hmm. Does liberalism necessitate a belief in a social contract, or would you say that's not necessary?
I think that's a very difficult question. Liberalism does kind of require you to believe that, we're all going to assume and accept the norms of that society that, in particular, will defer to the liberal conflict resolution methods. If you don't, if I, for example, were to say with science that we're going to defer to evidence and you don't believe in evidence, there's no evidence I could possibly give you to convince you to believe in evidence because you don't believe in evidence at all. So therefore, you actually do have to have some norm operating, which you could call a social contract that says, okay, we are actually going to agree to do this. I don't even know that every human being has to sign up for that full, to agree to that fully. But where decision making is taking place, it does. We have to say in our, engines of knowledge production, like research labs, universities, schools, and so on, even in our corporations, we do have to have a degree to where we say, all right, we're just going to let the evidence decide and we're going to take our personal feelings out of it. And science, for example, developed a great norm for that. The person who overturns the wrong science becomes famous. So there's a incentive to do better. So there does, I guess, have to be something of a social contract around that, if you want to call it that.
So does that mean that liberalism, in order to function, requires an agreed upon mythology or narrative that binds people together, that this is the kind of story of who we are as a people and what is the highest good for how we should conduct ourselves in order to have what you're talking about, a liberal order where science is respected and rules and reason are respected and evidence is respected and things like that?
Yes and no. We don't technically. It turns out that liberalism actually allows for quite a bit of pluralism in belief, right? So we can have a liberal society that contains Christians, Muslims, atheists, Hindus, Buddhists, go on and on and on. And each one can choose, they can each have their kind of moral law that they decide to follow as matters of personal conscience. But it separates that from state and from policy. And then it basically tries to step back and let people work things out themselves. So there is, of course, some overarching aspect to it. And it does help if you have this sort of meta-narrative, if you want, this overarching story of who we are as a community, who we are as a people. So, in that sense, I have become, again, I guess, very in favor of what we might call Americanism, belief in the American experiment, which is actually a belief that we can mix cultures and that we can hold ourselves to an experiment of liberal freedom in that context and do well by it.
And do you think that Americanism is something that most Americans still hold dearly, or do you think that's something that's becoming passé for a great deal of culture?
I would say that until very recently, many Americans, maybe an overwhelming majority, did believe in it, and now do. And I would point the finger very cleanly due to the influence of having taught critical theory, which is inherently anti-liberal, in its orientation, having taught critical theory as a primary method of education for the last 20 to 30 years in our educational systems, that the belief in the American experiment has crumbled. And so you will see a huge generational split on this in particular, but there is much less faith in it in younger people than there's maybe ever been. And I kind of hope to change that if I can.
Is your background in the universities sector, by the way?
I was in the universities until 2010, and then I left the university system.
Okay. And were you teaching critical theory or something else?
I taught mathematics.
Oh, okay. So that's why you don't like critical theory. Okay. We'll continue with James Lindsay, who is the founder of newdiscourses.com. When we continue, we're going to understand what the woke ideology is all about. You're hearing it everywhere. You're seeing statues come down. You're seeing language that sounds like critical theory. We're going to learn about that today, live on A Neighbor's Choice. Don't go anywhere. More in just a moment.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It can be devastating. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that will keep you informed throughout the entire process. That law firm is Catania & Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania & Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims do not even realize that they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to Catania & Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning over 28 years and family first. Catania & Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
Monitoring spokeswoman. The one thing that we've learned from an epidemic is that if we are healthy, we are far less likely to be susceptible to grave sickness. With that stated, stem cell activation is a big part of keeping ourselves healthy. By activating your own stem cells, you'll experience energy, better sleep, reduction in pain, and a support system that supports faster healing from wounds. LifeWave X39 patches are an easy, cost-affordable way to activate stem cells. Clinical studies demonstrate that LifeWave patches reset the genes in the body to a younger, healthier state. By wearing the daily patch, your body will activate the stem cells to give you benefits of a better way of living a healthy, productive life. Go to lifewave.com/B-radio to see how you can elevate, activate, and regenerate your life with stem cell therapy. There's a special offer now with B Radio. The address again is lifewave.com/B-radio. Live healthier and wiser with the X39 LifeWave patches at lifewave.com/B-radio.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Lang, board-certified optometric physician and certified nutritional specialist, host of popular talk show Ask the Doctor. I've researched and developed an amazing new omega-3 product that you'll see incredible results with. It's called Fortify Super Omega-3 Max. I had one of the top Norwegian omega-3 research teams in conjunction with myself and Fortify Vitamins aid in the development of this advanced omega-3. This product is the most potent and purest triglyceride form omega-3 in the United States today. Omega-3 is great for all aspects of your health and well-being, especially in this unprecedented, challenging time. I am giving a 25% discount with promo code RADIO during this viral pandemic. Go to my website, fortify.com. That's FORTIFEYE. Remember the EYE in Fortify. That's fortify.com. Enter the promo code RADIO to receive the 25% discount.
Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm here with James Lindsay, the founder of newdiscourses.com, which looks at critical theory, which is the ideology driving what we see in the talking points of the far left as they continue to become normalized in the mainstream of culture by big corporations and academia. So it's something I'm familiar with, having gone into those classes years ago and kept up with the work of the intellectual founders. But I wanted James Lindsay to come and talk about his work because that's what he's focused on in particular, is what we call critical social justice. What is critical social justice, James?
So critical social justice is the application of the idea of critical theory to the project of social justice. So the name is pretty straightforward. Social justice is a complicated idea. There are lots of approaches. It actually arose first in religion. It came up with, I think it originated with a Jesuit priest, as a matter of fact. It developed a social gospel, the Baptist social gospel, from Walter Rauschenbusch in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And it's been explored by liberal thinkers, including John Rawls, with his Veil of Ignorance thought experiment, for example. And then there are other approaches to it, one of which uses critical theory. Critical theory, as you know, we talked about how it has we positioned it before the break as kind of relevant to critiquing liberalism in particular. Critical theory begins from an assumption that there are hidden biases or injustices in all of our systems, and it is the job of the critical theorist to identify those and make them visible, which often includes reading them into things or exaggerating them or perhaps not understanding, and then complaining. You could picture somebody who has no idea. An example that was recently on social media, for example, was I've seen now the term the master bedroom, and I'll never sleep easily in one again, implying that it has something to do with slavery, although the term itself, master bedroom, arose in a catalog in 1929, well after slavery would have been relevant at all. So it had nothing to do with that. But nevertheless, there's this kind of mimetic connection between the words that causes somebody to have a problem. So they identify those problematics and make them visible. So the objective of critical social justice is to identify all of the different problematics around particularly matters of identity, race, sex, gender, sexuality, ability status, fat status, body status, and so on, that might contribute to somebody feeling as though something is unjust. So what it does, where we talked about liberalism having a project of finding the most objective standard possible and using the best methods we can to approximate that standard, critical social justice or critical theory in general relies upon a subjective standard that tries to judge these things morally. When they were first introduced in the 1920s and 30s, the idea was to use them together, these objective standard traditional theories, as they were called, alongside as a refinement these critical theories that were going to operate in a subjective and moral sense. And the problem is that as time has gone on, the reliance on traditional theory, science, philosophy, and so on, reason, evidence, has diminished, while the let's find how it hurts my feelings, problematic finding hot take side of critical theory has dramatically increased in its influence.
Mm-hmm. So how much of this is, I've interviewed Jordan Peterson, and he calls generally this movement cultural Marxism. I've heard it's from the Frankfurt School. Some say no, French postmodern thinkers are more involved in this, Foucault and, Derrida. And so do you see those, you got Herbert Marcuse of the German, Frankfurt School. He goes on over to work for the OSS in America, and then he becomes a fixture in academia. Critical theory is connected with him and his interest for kind of a revolutionary spirit. And so where do you trace the lineage of these ideas? I mean, you could even go back to existentialism, I guess, right?
You could go back to that and further, actually. So it's actually a very complicated story, as many movements in philosophy are. To kind of very much oversimplify the picture, all of what you just said is actually correct. And getting the timeline right in a simplified fashion that people can understand is important. So the key object to pay attention to at the kind of the origin of this is Marx, but I'm not talking about necessarily Marxism in general. I'm talking more specifically about his concept of conflict theory. Marx's conflict theory said that society is organized into different social groups who are in conflict with one another. And it's in fact it's a stratified theory, they call it. So some group is above the other and it oppresses the lower group, and the lower group is oppressed. So Marxist conflict theory is the seed. So we can move forward from Marx, and then we do get into this Frankfurt School. When I said traditional versus critical theory, that's Max Horkheimer from the 1930s that wrote that. You can look at the elements of criticism of the ways that media influences people's thoughts and how that can lead to the rise of fascism or other unfair things. That's Theodor Adorno. That's also a Frankfurt School name. You can talk about Walter Benjamin with the spiritual aspects, Erich Fromm with the psychological aspects. There's lots of different pieces to it. Marcuse definitely with his revolutionary spirit. He wrote Repressive Tolerance, which very much advocated for violence for revolution in 1965. And we saw violence and revolution in 1967 and 1968 as a derivable consequence of that, and with direct connection. And so that revolutionary spirit is there, but at the same time, in the late 60s and into the 70s, we saw the rise of the postmodern philosophers who were doing a different kind of criticism. And their criticism was mostly focused on language and structures of power and that dimension of thought, which is completely separate from the Frankfurt School, except that it still had that germ of Marxist conflict theory built into it. It still had, I mean, the guys were avowed, well, they call themselves post-communists. They were fans of Mao, and then they bailed on being fans of Mao as it got ugly. And they just kind of juggled around with all of these kind of ideas, very just kind of cynical and despairing about the direction of society. Then what happened, and what I have a book coming out this summer actually, called Cynical Theories, where we've traced one part of this story that I don't think has been told correctly ever, is in the late 1980s and early 1990s, following a number of particularly black feminist thinkers like Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis. You have Audre Lorde, for example. You have the infusion of postmodern theory into that liberationist, neo-Marxist or cultural Marxist kind of Marcusean Frankfurt School critical theory. So what we now have is critical theory that has been infused with a postmodern belief that to talk about true and false is to miss the point of the politics of every statement. So a removal from objectivity to pure subjectivity. So when I spoke a few moments ago and said that at the beginning there was a reliance upon using traditional theory and critical theory together, postmodernism came in explicitly around 1990 and came into critical theories, especially of race at the time, but also queer theory, and started to make the case that truth and falsity miss the point of the politics, so we don't have to pay attention to them. So you start to see feminist authors like Kelly Oliver writing, we should no longer focus on whether a theory is true or false, but only on its political usefulness. It was strategic theories.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned Angela Davis, who's become a big fixture for the Black Lives Matter movement and celebrated by today's Marxists. She was a student of Herbert Marcuse, wasn't she?
Right. The connections are actually quite clear for people who are willing to trace it carefully, but the difficulty is that they're often buried as well. You find Ange Marie Hitchcock writing in 2004 about the nature of intersectionality, for example, and explaining that it's of utmost importance when you talk about Foucauldian power structures, that you don't talk about Michel Foucault, who was a white man. You talk about Patricia Collins, who interpreted it into a different paradigm because she's a black woman. So you cite the
let's
black
hold
woman
that thought.
as a white man.
You know what time of year it is.
Hurricane conditions in the next 36 hours.
You know what hurricanes can do.
Devastating damage expected.
Well, we want you to know, no matter how bad things get,
Power outages.
This is life-threatening.
you can stay up to date with the latest information here. Your home for news, talk, and information. And remember, we'll keep an eye on the tropics. You keep an ear on us.
Got batteries in the flashlight.
The all-new News Talk 1040 WHBO.
We got our radio set.
Members of the Coronavirus Task Force telling lawmakers today that until there is a vaccine, states will have to work to curb coronavirus cases by using social distancing measures and other safety measures. Admiral Brett Giroir with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services When asked whether President Trump asked him to do less testing, that after the president commented at the rally in Tulsa that he thinks testing should be slowed.
Neither the president nor anyone in the administration has instructed or suggested that we should do less testing, have said that to me, and we are proceeding in just the opposite.
A 7.4 magnitude earthquake in southern Mexico today, rocking other areas, including buildings in Mexico City. Mexico's president confirms at least one person died, another person was injured. So far, no serious reports of damage, but there have been more than 140 aftershocks so far. And a new storm has formed over the North Atlantic. The National Hurricane Center says Dolly is a tropical storm, but says it does not pose a threat to the U.S. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
What is critical theory? What is wokeness? These are words that you're going to hear a lot more. Something I learned, when I was in school. I once argued because, as our guest will talk about, social construction, the social construction of language, how language is socially constructed and our reality itself is socially constructed. I found it very easy to make A's in college by socially constructing the most bizarre things. I once argued in a gender identity studies class that Lion King was about a story of a female lion cub transitioning to a male lion cub, and I got thunderous applause. And that was a satire, but they didn't realize it because that's how ridiculous the ideology was. Now I'm joined by James Lindsay, founder of NewDiscourses.com, where he gets into social justice movement and what it's all about from an intellectual standpoint and arms people with an understanding of what its mission is. So, James, you know about social construction of reality, right?
I do. And in fact, I have, you may not know, or maybe you do know that I have a very similar story to the one you just told. My colleagues and I, in 2017 and 18, perpetrated what's now known as the Grievance Studies Affair, where we got a series of these, we wrote similar bogus social constructivist articles and got them accepted by a spate of peer-reviewed journal articles at, the full research level that were equally ridiculous as your Simba and transition story.
Yeah, I played the opening clip of when Rafiki presents Simba at the beginning and paused it right when you got a straight-on shot and then moved it over to when he's got the full mane and everything. And, I mean, they were just in thunderous excitement. And I think a few of the more common-sense kids in the back, they understood what I was doing, and they were laughing and enjoying themselves. But, the professor was just thrilled. And I found that to be the case wherever I went. If you just kind of, because they don't have any grounding in an objective truth, they cannot critique satire, because if you dress up your satire nice enough, they just can't see they can't see what's what. It's all the same to them because it's all social construction.
Right. So the idea of social constructivism is that even if there is a reality out there, this is the way the postmodern philosopher, or sort of postmodern philosopher Richard Rorty put it, even if there's a reality out there, the truth isn't out there.
Right.
So what that means is our ideas of true and false, in this is pure postmodern thought, but it's full on in the woke ideology. Our ideas of true and false have to be determined by social processes, by somebody. So it's not reality that tells us whether a thing is true or false. It's a process that was created by people, but all processes created by people must be political. And so their political biases are part of the process. So the claim to truth is also political. So there is no reality of true or false with statements. It's all of our knowledge, all of our language, all of our interface with reality is socially constructed. So even if they acknowledge that a reality exists beneath the social construction, say they say gender is a social construct, maybe there's a reality beneath that has something to do with biological sex. But the point is that it misses the point to talk about the underlying reality, because only the political constructed part is interesting to talk about. And so this is actually how they think about the world. And this is when you see, like with the current issue with, say, Black Lives Matter right now, why you see them saying our lived realities all the time. And what they're speaking of often doesn't match data. It doesn't match what actually happened. It doesn't match our understanding of law in a free society. But they say it's our lived reality. Maybe it's true that somebody's not being shot every day by police, but a black person's not being shot every day, but it feels like it is to us. So that's our lived reality.
Right. So it is true.
This is actually a social construction.
Right. Yeah. And that's right. But at the same time, it's a little complicated because there's some truth to that. One of my favorite filmmakers, Werner Herzog, the German filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, he talks about ecstatic truth, right? He says ecstatic truth versus, facts. And he says you can look at facts all day long by, skimming through a telephone book. You can see the names and numbers and addresses and everything, but you won't learn any truth, real deep truth. He calls ecstatic truth that's something that goes beyond reason. And it's kind of an ecstasy of feeling that kind of speaks to the human condition, right? So there is something good about that, but then it gets, so how do we parse out that? Because Herzog is famous for, he'll manipulate scenes in his documentary films. Like there's a movie he made about Little Dieter Learns to Fly, about a guy who was in a prison camp in Vietnam, I believe. And the guy comes out of the prison camp and he's living his life many years later. And he has this scene where he has him open the door of his front door of his house 3 times, open, close, open, close, open, close. And then later it's explained that ever since he was locked in that prison cage, he has an obsession with making sure the door can open easily and close. Well, Herzog made up that. He doesn't actually have that issue, but he had the man do it to show a symbolic experience of what was going on in his internal mind, even though it wasn't literally true that he actually had that issue. So is that, you see how that kind of is close to what they're talking about lived truth, right? A little bit?
Yeah, it's actually really funny. It's very serendipitous that I got asked this question today, because I've really been wrestling with this. And it's one of those things, every now and then you wake up and you're laying there in bed, haven't quite opened your eyes yet, and it hits you. And that was today, actually. This morning, I realized that we have a phrase for this, which is setting the record straight. Mm-hmm. And so the difference between truth and the record, right? There's a difference between the record and then there's truth, right? So when you try to set the record straight, you try to get truth to bear more on the narrative that's going around the truth, right? So I did, like I said, the Grievance Studies Affair. Anybody who's ever been featured in the media about anything of any even modest significance will have experienced this, that the narrative gets away from you and the event becomes something that's not you and wasn't what happened. So you have there is this truth. And then there's the record, that the narrative, maybe it's a media narrative, maybe it's something like you just described. Maybe it's a myth. Maybe it's a mythology that's being built up. There is this, and it's often very emotional in that case. There is the truth, and then there's the record. And one of the things that if we want to solve our problems, we really have to do is always try to set the record straight. So we want to try to bend, the narrative's always going to run wild. We always want to try to preserve a norm, that getting the truth to bear on the narrative more and more and more to set the record straight is a crucial aspect to creating a society that functions in ways that aren't going to fight it in the end. Because as everybody should know, reality passed last. Yeah. And so we can all lie to ourselves for a long time. And then, I don't want to bring up like the most awful example of that, but Trofim Lysenko obviously believed in Soviet biology and all of these weird ideas about how crops might grow using the wrong genetics and cooperative methods instead of plant competition. And so he believed, and the Soviet apparatus went with that, and they all thought, well, if we do the Soviet biology and we get rid of all the biologists who disagree and we do this with all the farms, this is going to work out. And reality came in the end and killed millions of people by starvation, because you can only pretend so long. So we always want to try to, that's why liberalism is so important, is to get those objective standards and try to bend the record more and more back toward the verifiable truth to the degree that can be had.
I can tell you another story from college, university is, they had one course where there was you had to present a presentation of female depiction in media from any era to show how, the advertising norms were creating this kind of vulgarization and stereotypes of women, that they're mothers, so most of the folks would take, like a 70s or something, and they would take clips from, magazine advertisements with women, vacuuming the floor or having an oven mitten and showing how these stereotypes that women would be lauded for being mothers or sexual figures were completely constructed by capitalism or patriarchy or Western civilization or some kind of Christian influence, right? And so I presented the Venus of Willendorf as my artistic representation, which is, it dates back to 30,000 BCE, so that's, 32,000 years ago, before we had Christianity or, before we had capitalism as we understand it or Western civilization. One of the oldest art depictions we have left, 30,000 BCE, and it's this, this limestone figure of a woman, and it's all about fertility. Let's just put it that way because we're on a children's program. It's all fertility. It's large, exaggerated features that are emphasizing the sacredness of motherhood and the the sexual nature of the gender that this statue represents is clearly exaggerated. So this idea that these things that we have are power constructs of capitalism or the church they just fall apart when you look at history, don't they?
Yeah, I actually have been trying to figure out a way to communicate this, but it's overwhelmingly there's a strong feeling like that this ideology looks at the world through the wrong end of the telescope. If you've ever done that, everything's small and hard to figure out what it is. And one of the things that I would try to communicate is that it's kind of like this creation myth that the Enlightenment, where we started to develop science, where we started to develop liberal principles, where we started to invent technology that could really lead to world conquest in particular, that somehow cheated. It's almost like that's the origin of history for them. And then that's where the oppression came into the world. You can actually explain it in a very religious way. The invention of science is eating from the tree of knowledge. We got ejected from the noble savage Garden of Eden right afterwards because of that. The first thing we do is we go conquer the innocent, able world of indigenous cultures and colonize them with, and so the mark of Cain becomes European colonization. And you can actually kind of map out the whole mythology very cleanly. And so what you end up seeing is that they have this distorted way of viewing everything, that Western society, Western civilization, science, liberalism, capitalism, democracy with Republican norms to it, all of that is the great evil of society that took us out of the garden. And they have this very odd way of thinking about it. So when you start, it takes very little effort to find examples outside of their narrative that completely upset it. For example, they talk about slavery as being something that white people did to black people only. All you have to do is point to the Barbary pirates, for example, and you flip it on its head and they don't know what to do. Or you look at the situations in Africa in the present day where it's, slavery that's definitely not white owned. You flip it on its head. Or you look at what's going on, historically with just about every culture throughout history at different times with neighboring tribes, and it flips it on its head. And all they have left to say is, well, this is the one we care about because it's the one that's core to our system. And that's that social constructivism again. The system we live in was socially constructed in the Enlightenment, and it's not perfect, so it's terrible, so we have to get rid of it.
Which ironically makes them cultural chauvinists that interpret everything through a Western-dominated lens, doesn't it? They're the height of cultural chauvinists because they frame everything from the Western perspective, as if everybody has to bow history to their little Western perspective of how to look at things.
That's right. If you read, Edward Said's Orientalism, which is a key text in this line of thought, in the post-colonial vein of thought, you very much can see how their complaint is that the West established the East as a foil to be less than it. And then liberalism started to say, wait, everybody's just people. And then post-colonial theory comes along and says, no, we're going to preserve the East, we're going to preserve the South, and we're going to say that they're the victims. So there's this weird conservatism, right?
Yeah.
You know, they say that white people invented the racial categories to control black people. And that's kind of true in some regards as far as the European aspect of history goes, of that one particular aspect. It has a grain of truth to it. And then liberalism has done nothing but we got rid of slavery, we got rid of Jim Crow, we passed the Civil Rights Act, we start working for more and more social and economic equality throughout society for the entire history of the country. And then critical race theory comes along and says, as Kimberly Crenshaw's words and Bell Hook's words, there's a fundamental difference between I happen to be black and I am black. I am a black person. Put the identity first. Let's put social significance back into racial categories. Critical whiteness studies, which is kind of Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility, that's #1 bestseller right now. That's her territory. The whole objective of that is to awaken a white racial identity and to put it in the context of that Marxist conflict theory that says that, you know, the goal is to convince all white people that they're the oppressor class. So you need to awaken to your racial identity as a white person and that you're an oppressor. And it's like the most backwards conservative thing I've ever seen in my life.
What
you know,
have
I
any
say conservative because they're so far left.
Have any critical theorists in your studies examined the oppression of what the Persian Empire did or the Babylonians? Has there been any work on that?
I mean, no, of course not. Those fall outside of the Western context.
I'm just wondering if they found a way to put whiteness as the problem of what Babylonians were doing or Sumerians. Were they doing that? Was that a problem of white supremacy or white fragility that the Sumerians or the Persians were sticking people in the middle of logs and letting them rot out in their flesh for years? Was that some kind of white supremacy or patriarchy or something? Do they do anything with that?
It's prehistory, so they have no analysis for it. Their analysis is about post-Enlightenment Western civilization.
Sounds like they worship the West.
Prehistory.
Yeah, sounds like they worship the West.
They do.
That's it.
It's like self-flagellating worship.
Yeah,
right?
I say that word a lot. Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Let's take a quick break.
I saw
James, we're going to take a quick break. We're on a hard break here, but we'll return with James Lindsay. Check out his website, newdiscourses.com. We'll continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It can be devastating. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that will keep you informed throughout the entire process. That law firm is Catania & Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania & Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims do not even realize that they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to Catania & Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning over 28 years and family first. Catania & Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
Man, how can you afford gas for that big SUV? I pay less for gas than everyone else. I got the free Get Upside Gas app and get up to 25 cents a gallon cash back every time I buy gas.
Hold on. You're getting up to 25 cents off a gallon with the free Get Upside Gas app while I'm paying full price?
You know it. People earned over $1 million last year. You just got to take a picture of your gas receipt and bam, up to 25 cents a gallon cash back.
You don't have to tell me twice. I'm downloading the free Get Upside Gas app now.
Download the free Get Upside app now in the App Store or Google Play to save up to 25 cents a gallon when you buy gas. Use promo code TRUCK for a 20-cent a gallon bonus on your first tank. That's up to 45 cents a gallon on your next tank. Just download the free Get Upside app at the App Store or Google Play and use promo code TRUCK. Save money on gas on every fill-up. Download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TRUCK. That's TRUCK.
Let's face it, these are stressful times. New routines, the constant bombardment of bad news, and trying to keep you and your family safe all the time. It's Frank for Center for Men's Health. During these stressful times, your mood is so critical, and nothing's more important to a guy's mood than testosterone. The single greatest issue for guys with low T is mood, and the single greatest change for men that get low T care is a greatly improved mood. Many are grumpy when they start, and most can't believe how much their mood improves once they get treated. And everything improves once your mood improves. Feel the difference C4MH.com can make in your life. I've been a patient of C4MH.com for a couple of years, and recently I've lost 20 pounds because now I have the energy to work out from home. And that'll put you in a good mood too. C4MH.com's Express Treatment Plan is convenient, affordable, and above all, safe. And with locations all up and down West Florida, there's one near you right now. Find out more. Go to C4MH.com.
We're talking about critical theory, social justice ideology. It's something that's dominating the discourse in our conversations for now because it loves the West. It's obsessed with worshiping the West. I would call it a cultural chauvinistic ideology. And we're talking with James Lindsay, who dedicates his work, newdiscourses.com, to understanding it. So check it out and get prepared. And be careful about sending your kids into an indoctrination camp like universities are, where they're going to learn about this stuff in every class that they take. I don't know about mathematics. Is critical theory in mathematics yet? I'm sure it is, right?
They're making their way in, yeah, actually. There are even curricula now that have been deployed, for example, in the Seattle city school system, the ethnic studies curriculum that applies also to mathematics, and that curriculum requires, and you can actually look this up on the state government's website, their education board's website, where it has, points like we need to figure out ways to make math less individualist and more collectivist. We need to figure out ways to bring storytelling into math. We need to orient math around how can math be used to support social justice initiatives, or how have you seen it used in your life to maintain oppression. So yeah, it's making its way even into mathematics.
And the ultimate goal, whenever you say help math support social justice issues, is political power, isn't it?
That's correct. This is a movement that is only able to see political power. It believes that knowledge is political power. It believes that every utterance somebody makes is political power. It believes that a person, its slogan for years, that's evolving now, was the personal is political.
Yeah.
So it sees the person and your identity as politics. You can't even be who you are. You can't wear clothing. You can't do anything without it being a political statement.
Right.
So everything for it is politics, and everything politics is power, and that's exactly what they're.
So in that sense, it owes some of its inheritance to Nietzsche as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Foucault in particular was a huge Nietzschean and derived a lot of his views from Nietzsche.
And you mentioned that
power.
You mentioned that there's a concerted effort to hide. When you talk about Foucault, you gotta dress it up by attributing it to a black thinker, so that they don't show that these ideas come from white Europeans, right? Is that what you were saying?
Correct. That's partly because Foucault was actually very pessimistic. His belief was that power will always replace power, and so that these problems repeat cyclically.
Right.
So if we came up with a liberatory regime, it would replace the current regime, and it would then become abusive in its use of power. And so that would imply that something like the woke movement will become the problem it fights if it's allowed to, and that can't be allowed to be found out. So you can't fight that.
Right.
And he was very deconstructive. Deconstruction was a play toy of bourgeois white liberal men who had the ability to afford deconstructing things, where identity politicians have to work for, oppressed people have to work for what they can get, so they don't have those luxuries. So there's a lot of problematization of Foucault and a lot of burying of his legacy. He also, and especially near the end of his life, got very positive about the concept of biopolitics or biopower that he came up with, which was an explanation that if we actually try to organize society, and his whole meta project of his whole works was disciplining and punishment, and how societies are ordered and controlled. If we're going to do that, doing it by deferring to science is actually a better way than, say, the rule of kings or an episcopate or something like that. And so he started to warm up to biopolitics, which obviously could not have possibly been acceptable. So they had to bury Foucault and his influence, lest somebody find out the whole thing. I've been in contact with many actual Foucauldian scholars since I've started this work, who are also deeply critical of what's become his legacy in the hands of the woke.
Right. That's something I asked a professor I can recall from university where they were saying that there was all this, structural hegemony, power of, the whites were always trying, basically it's like a conspiracy theory that white people were in a kind of a conspiracy for generationally to war against all the other races and subjugate them. And even if you don't know what you're doing, if you're white, you're part of that conspiracy the moment you're born and all this stuff. And I said, okay, so suppose that you get
exactly right.
And I asked the professor in front of the class, I said, so suppose you get exactly what you want, your ideology, you overthrow and you win and you beat every single thing. What then? What then when you have the power? What are you going to do? Is it not going to be an oppressive structure for the people who are now subjugated under this power-hungry frame of reality? And she had no answer. She had zero answer. And none of them do, because they don't want to talk about that, because it's like, it's a perpetual, like being on a treadmill. You're just running and running and running, and you don't want to talk about what happens once you get to your destination, right? I think we lost our guest here. James Lindsay, do we have you? Let's see if we have James back with us. We're talking about the critical theory. That is something that is in the news a lot. It's something that we need to be concerned about because it has a lot of cachet with the community of America. Do we have James Lindsay? Are you back?
I am back.
Okay, James. Sorry about that. So we're running out of time now, so we got about a minute left. But I actually think that the work of the French thinker René Girard could be a good antidote intellectually to the French postmodernists that undergird the critical theory. Have you looked at René Girard's work?
Only lightly, and from what I have seen, I tend to agree. In fact, I hear that from philosophers very frequently, so I'm inclined to believe that it's true.
Yeah.
I haven't done that research myself, as I'm too focused on figuring out what these folks have actually said in their own work.
Well, what's interesting?
A new critical consciousness called wokeness.
Well, we're going to have you on again because we're out of time now. But we'll do a deeper dive. Maybe we'll do a podcast exclusive online with you where we can dive in a little bit further into some of this stuff. But I think we've done a good job of setting the foundation for some of these things, and you did a great job, James. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, what's interesting about René Girard, I'll leave you with this, is that he was the guy that actually brought a lot of these French postmodern theorists into America. He did a conference with some of them in the 1960s at Johns Hopkins University. And he was in dialogue with them because they were his contemporaries in France, and he kind of wanted to have them come to America. But he didn't agree with them. He believed his mimetic theory was a much more satisfactory answer than the deconstruction of meaning that they were involved in. And so I think it's ironic that the guy who accidentally unleashed them into American academia could provide the intellectual vanguard to replace and to challenge the critical theory intellectually and to show that it's an emperor with no clothes. So it'll be exciting to explore that with you.
Could work.
Yeah.
Because none of this is popular in France now. None of it.
Yeah, interesting. Newdiscourses.com is James' website. Thanks again, James.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. So, folks, you just got woke about woke, huh? Social justice? It's not exactly what it markets itself as. And we'll continue to unpack how it's actually, as I said, cultural chauvinism and the domain of rich billionaires trying to subjugate the vast masses. I'm David Gronowski. Godspeed.